Hi, Clara. We're glad you can join us.
There we go.
I,
All
I
right.
saw it.
Okay, so yeah, I'll be putting this on YouTube. Oh yeah, how is Lent going for everybody?
Bears, are
Fasting?
you going to listen?
He's listening, I'm
Bears.
sure.
Good.
Berge, I want to talk about the canon tables. I want your input too. Okay, let's start with Heidemir. Oh, John Berberian. Should I admit him? Yeah. Okay. Hey, John.
Hi, John.
Howdy, sorry to be late.
Hey, John.
I'm here.
Good. All right. So
Sorry to be
let's
late.
start with Heidemir.
Okay.
Anun hor yvërtfo, yvokfuin sërfo, amen. Heidemir vërherginise surp jegicianun ko. Jegesse arkayutun ko. Jegicin gam ko, vorbes erginise vekri. Asats mer hana bazor dur mez aysor. Եվ թող մեզ զբարտիս մեր, որպես եւ մեկ թողունք մերոց բարդաբանած։ Եվ մի դանիրս մեզի փորձություն, ալպրգազ մեզի չարեն։ Զիքոյ արքայություն եւ զորություն եւ փառք հավիտյանս, amen. Okay, so last time, which was a couple of weeks ago, so you may have forgotten, we're talking about the Corinthians and how they related to food that was sacrificed to idols. All right, this was a pretty common practice in Corinth. There were many celebrations, there were many gods, and if you were in society or even in civic life in Corinth, it's very likely that you were a part of a celebration where they were sacrificing food to a god. All right, and Christians had to deal with this because they were part of a Corinthian life there, and the Corinthians were wondering. Some Corinthians were wondering, is that okay? Some people thought that it wasn't. Some people thought, well, why shouldn't it be? I'm a Christian. I know that these are not real gods. So what if they sacrifice it to this, god of, tool making or whatever? It doesn't affect me any because I know that that's not a real god. But for some reason, that was for some Corinthians, that was a real concern. And Paul is addressing this question to the Corinthian church, and he particularly focuses on the people who are very free, who feel very free in their new faith, in their Christianity, because that's what Christianity has brought to the Corinthians, a new kind of freedom, especially the Jewish Corinthians. In God, in Christ, but he warns the Corinthians there that you should be careful how you exercise this freedom, because you should beware lest one of your brothers stumbles because of this liberty of yours. All right, because maybe they have a conscientious scruple that might be affected by that freedom that the other Corinthians were expressing by eating that food. And that kind of goes with our theme that we've seen in Corinthians for a while now, where Paul is emphasizing wisdom over knowledge. The Corinthians think they know everything, and they think they're smart, and they don't need to be taught much more from Paul. But Paul provides them a perspective on the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, and that knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous, and it can cause other people to stumble. Especially, and we talked about conscience as well, and we talked about how some people perhaps seeing that another brother in the church is going and eating this food sacrificed to an idol, to a non-god, right, might do the same, but in their conscience they don't think that it's right. And we ask the question, if you do something that really isn't a sin, but you think it's a sin, or your conscience tells you that it's wrong, is it a sin? And we've discovered that it is. That the man who doubts, if he does something that is not from faith, he's committing a sin. This is Paul writing to the Romans, which is another church that he helped establish. And he says the man who doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith. And everything that does not come from faith is a sin. So we have to be very careful with regard to our consciences, and especially in this case, Paul is trying to bring some order to the Corinthian church to make sure that people in the Corinthian church don't become stumbling blocks for their own brothers in the church. And he says, and he says, it's if food is going to make my brother stumble, he's talking about his own, using himself as an example here, I'll never eat meat again, because it's that important for the church life, for the life of the body of Christ, that everyone be encouraged and empowered and what's the right word? Enabled to. I'm using very secular words right now. What's the right word, Nairi? To be encouraged to follow Christ in the best way that they can, and not to cause each other to stumble. All right.
That sounds right.
Sounds right. That's good enough. Okay. So. Now Paul is going to continue. That was chapter 8. Now we're in chapter 9, and he's going to continue with this theme because he's very passionate about this topic. It even extends into chapter 10. And if he's writing for this many chapters, clearly this is something that we should pay attention to. But we're going to take a detour because, of course, Paul didn't write any letter with chapters. There were no chapters or verses in the letter. No one writes a letter like that. I mean, who annotates their letters in such a way? It didn't happen then. It doesn't happen today. So where did these chapters and verses come from? I want to address that for a second. Does anyone know where did where did we get these chapters and verses in our Bible?
I never saw them
from Sunday school. Maybe? Oh, ignore this part. We'll get to this in a second, okay? Anyone? All right, well.
No,
Yes. Yes, I'll chemadadzel minchev vercheres. Well, for many years, it wasn't really an issue because it was what we're used to seeing in the Bible. But it's an interesting question, and
it is, yeah.
And let's understand where it comes from. So the Old Testament books and the letters in the New Testament and the Gospels, they weren't written in chapter and verse form. In fact, some of the books didn't even have punctuation, and we have to go and understand what the people were saying. Just a second, let me admit, Gohar. It takes someone who's very familiar with that language or a linguist today to understand what the heck that people were writing. Sometimes they're not even spaces in between words, let alone markings for chapters and verses. So in modern Bibles, what we have today, the chapters go back to the 13th century, and there was a cardinal at the University of Paris named Stephen Langton, and he divided up the New Testament books into chapters. All right, and then so that's the 13th century. Much later, a few hundred years later, the verse divisions came into the Bible, and the first Bible that was used that had chapter and verse is the 15 and 60 Geneva version of the Bible, and that's the template that we use for other translations today and versions of the Bible today for dividing each book into chapters and verse. And it's very helpful, right? It's helpful for us to index and to talk to each other about different parts of the Bible through this system of chapter and verse. Well, what did people do before this time? Before the 13th century? Anyone have a clue?
They had to rightly divide the word of truth.
Yes. Did they use any mechanism to help them do that? They did, it turns out. And this goes back to Eusebius, who's a 4th century church father. And he found that it was helpful to have some sort of markings in the text so that people can talk to each other about this section of the Bible or that section of the Bible. And in particular, and these are some of the markings. Not all of this. This is an illumination, right? But some of these guys over here are indexes to this part of the text. All right, and this is called a Eusebian section. All right, and these Eusebian sections he placed near text in each gospel. This is the gospel text we're looking at now, and he placed these markers in parts of texts where he can correspond an event or a saying or a miracle in one gospel to the same thing in another gospel. Like, for example, the healing of the woman, the healing of the woman that was bleeding, for example, in one gospel, he'd make a mark, and that would correspond to the same miracle in another gospel. And at the beginning of the Bible, that that had these sections, he would make a table. He would make a table of all these notations where the table was divided into 10 canons or 10 sections. Okay, to make a type of Bible concordance, which is how in one version of the gospel, in the Gospel of Matthew, you can see, okay, if I see this miracle or saying in Matthew, I'll find it also in Mark and Luke and John. So he divided the sections that he annotated into 10 canons, and the first canon is all of the annotations or all of the events or sayings of Christ that appear in all 4 Gospels. So in the first part of the canon table, Canon 1 has annotations for things that are common across all 4 Gospels. All right. Then he went down the list and it said, well, what if one of the Gospels didn't have it? So canons 2, 3, and 4 have 3 of the Gospels that include that saying or miracle or event, right? And etc. going down until the last canon, where you have sort of individual events that are of note that people want to share and reference, but they only appear in one of the Gospels. Okay, and I underlined or I outlined Canon 9 because I want to show you the canon table of Toros Roslin. All right, he is an Armenian manuscript artist who used this Eusebian principle, the Eusebian sections, to make a canon table. And these canon tables are, I only show you a section here, but you can see already very ornate and very beautiful and very helpful. Very helpful for the people to understand what's going on. Here, let's take a look. Let me go back here for a second. We're looking at Canon 9. All right, and also remember Canon 10, and in Canon 9 we have the books from Luke and John. All right, so things that are common to Luke and John. And here we're going to see Ganon To. Now, in Armenian Gurapar, we didn't use the Arabic numerals. We used Abagade, right? Ip was 1, Bo was 2, etc., etc. To is 9. So in Canon Table 9, we have Hugas and Hovanes. And in this table, we see these marks that show, well, in Hugas, there's some event, I don't know what that points to in this Bible, but it corresponds to this symbol or this section notation in John. And this is how people before the internet and before Bible concordances and before verse and chapter referenced and shared Bible verses with each other. This is the canon table for, this is Ganon, where is it? Je. So Ganon, Je, and Je is 10. And this is about Aranzinen. This is the parts of the canon table that just have singlets, so to speak, just single events. And here we see references to Matthew, and Mark. So Matthew has 2 columns of stuff that he's referencing, and Mark. So this is the canon table of Toros Roslin. Berge, did you see any of this?
Bitch.
I wanted Bears to see that. Anyway. That's okay. It's too late. Well, I'll talk to him about it later because I wonder if he made this connection between the canon tables in the Armenian illuminations and the Eusebian sections that we just talked about. Anyway, all that is an aside. Has nothing to do with Corinthians 9. But I thought it was interesting because of the fact that we use chapters and verses, and we're in chapter 9, and we're going to be talking about different verses in Corinthians. And I thought it was interesting because it connects to something that's very important in the Armenian manuscript tradition, which is the canon table.
Yeah, it is interesting. Thanks, Zav, really. And there's no explanation about this BG կամ ԺԹ-ն ինչա չկա, հա, բացատրություն.
I would guess that if we went to the rest of the Bible where this canon table came from, we would see the annotations like this. Right? In the index, or not in the index, in the what is it called? In the margins of the text. Mm-hmm. Right? And just like we have, in our Bible, we have, verse 4, for example,
right,
and then the text. That's what they use those symbols for.
So he just used the Armenian letters to probably.
Right.
Okay,
yeah, because they didn't use the Arabic numbers. Arabic numbers came much later. I don't know, 10th, 11th century.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but on churches, very often you see the letters about the year that the church was built.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And if you ever open the Kurapar Bible or a church, the Bible that's in the church where they read the lectionary, all of the chapters are by letters, not by numbers. Okay. So anyway, this is a brief discussion about chapters and verses, but let's get into chapter 9 of Corinthians. Remember, Paul didn't write in chapters, so he's in the middle of talking to the Corinthians about this issue that they had with food to idols, and also how their behavior might tempt and cause other people to stumble in their church. And like I said, he talks about this for a couple of chapters. So let's read this section 1 through 11 and see what he's trying to say. Who would like to read? Nicolette, you always volunteer.
Okay. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I am not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this: do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? Or is it only Cephas? Sorry.
That's right.
Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? Whoever goes to war at his own expense. Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit, or tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? Do I say these things as a mere man, or does not the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle a threshing ox. Is it oxen God is concerned about, or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be the partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things?
Thanks, Nicola. So lots of questions, lots of rhetorical questions, right? He's asking here, am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Do I say these things as a mere man? What point is he trying to make here? What is he trying to... Because I think, based on the rhetorical nature of these questions, he knows the answer, that the Corinthians should be giving to those questions. So what is he trying to remind perhaps the Corinthians of, or what is he trying to get across to them through all these rhetorical questions? Well, let's go through a couple of them. Am I not an apostle? What do you think the Corinthians should answer to that?
That he is?
He is an apostle. Is he free?
Oh, free of what?
Well, that's a good question. Free like the Corinthians say they're free.
I guess he's trying to exercise his authority a little bit.
He's a what?
Well, sort of exercising his authority to make them listen to him.
He is underlining his authority, his freedom, his apostleship, his rights, right? Do we? And it looks like he's talking about he and Barnabas here. Do we have no right to take along a believing wife as do other apostles? Of course we do. All right. Is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? No, we have. We can refrain from working. We have that right too. All right. And then he continues. Who goes to war at his own expense? Nobody. Why is he talking about that? Why is he talking about planting a vineyard and not eating the fruit, or tending a flock and not drinking the milk?
It's about sacrifice.
Whose sacrifice?
Like our sacrifice of today for a better tomorrow.
Well, does that fit? Who goes to a war at his own expense? What's the logical answer to that? No one goes to war.
No one.
No one goes to war at their own expense, right? In other words, there's Paul is making a bunch of analogies here to a person who undertakes an activity and understands that there's a cost involved, a material cost. Who doesn't plant a vineyard, and then there's also a material reward. Who doesn't plant a vineyard and not eat of its fruits? Well, nobody. That's ridiculous. No. You plant a vineyard to eat the fruits. You tend the flock to, and you get part of the milk. So, what does all this mean, though? Why is he bringing up all this stuff to the Corinthians?
Does it go back to the very first question? Well, I guess not the first, but the second, where he says, "Am I not free?" So I think it goes back to having free will to do what you want, but then also having the free will to discern what's right or wrong. So we're all free, right, up to a point.
Yes.
And I think we see this in our current culture, right? We live in a very permissive culture, so we all have certain freedoms, and I have the freedom to do certain things, yet we choose not to.
Why?
Because we know that they just aren't part of our moral code that was given to us by God.
Okay, because remember at the last sentence from chapter 8. Let me scroll back up for a second just to remind you. Was this? Oops. If food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat again, lest I make my brother stumble. Now, that's a live issue in the Corinthian church. There are some people who feel free. They know that a food offered to a god is no thing. It's because the god is not real. But there are people around them for whom that's a problem, for whom that's an issue. When they see a brother in the church doing something that they're free to do, technically free to do, but it causes them a problem, what is Paul's reaction to that? That's no good. You shouldn't cause your brother to stumble. You shouldn't cause your brother to stumble. Now, he says
that if you do, you are to have a chain on your neck and thrown into the deep water so you cannot get out of that situation. That's how severe
Serious
is
it
the
is.
punishment.
Yeah, for if you cause, he was talking about children then, I think. If you cause one of these little ones to sin or to stumble, it's better if you were thrown into the sea with a millstone around your neck, right? Am I quoting correctly?
Yeah.
I think so. We could check later. This is a serious issue that Paul is talking about, but he spends, let's see, he spends this section here that we just read, spends a lot of time talking about his own rights as an apostle. I have a right to eat and drink. I have a right to have a wife if I need one. And he gives this example of a threshing ox. What's this all about? Does anyone know what a threshing ox is?
No, I don't.
Is it he goes
Plowing.
around with the wheat when they're threshing the wheat, and then the ox pulls the stone or
That's
grinds the stone?
That's right. And so in the old days when they gather the wheat, the wheat is like a tall grass, and the stuff that you want to eat in the wheat is surrounded by a husk, and you have to separate the wheat part from the husk. And what threshing was they took this ox and they tied a big weight behind him. They tied a big weight behind him. It's not evident here. It may not even exist here. And he would go around and around on this big, thing of wheat to crush the wheat grains and separate out the husk from the wheat kernels. And then they would throw all that stuff in the air, and the wind would take the husk away, and only the wheat would remain. Okay, and this is a picture of this threshing, and the part of the Bible that Paul quoted was from Deuteronomy. It's a book full of laws for the people of Israel, for the Jews, for the old Jews in the Old Testament. Here's a couple of them. When people have a dispute, they are to take it to court, and the judges will decide, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. That's a rule that they should live by. If a guilty person deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make them lie down and have them flogged in his presence with the number of lashes the crime deserves. This is a way for the punishment not to get overboard. And it's interesting, amid all of these talking about judging and penalties, and here's some about family life. If brothers living together and one of them dies, then the widow must marry the other brother, and the brother should try to perform his duty to his brother-in-law. And within all this, there's this one outlier verse, it seems, about a threshing ox. All right, what is the problem with muzzling a threshing ox, muzzling an ox while it's treading out the grain? Paul says, don't you know the law in the Old Testament? It says, don't muzzle a threshing ox.
Means that the ox can't eat on the job.
Yes, the ox is working. It's doing all this threshing for you, and if you muzzle it, it won't be able to eat any of the grain that it has separated. All right, and that's not quite fair. That's not right. It's not right for the ox. All right, and what Paul says is, do you think God is talking about oxes? No, he's talking about. In this case, Paul is bringing this quotation from Deuteronomy to show that, look, I'm an apostle. I have all this freedom and I have all this authority, and I'm working for you. I'm bringing you the gospel. I'm sacrificing my time and putting my life in danger. Don't you think that someone like me has a right to have some privileges from that? Right? Someone like me who through God's grace brought me to you and brought you this faith, this truth, right? This life, right? And he says, people who plow should plow in hope. He who threshes should thresh in hope and should be partakers in this hope. All right? If he has brought you spiritual things, shouldn't he also be able to reap material things? What's the case he's making here?
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
He's basically saying, as you said, I am doing all of this for you. If you support me financially, or I don't know, not just financially, but could you provide for me and so that I can continue doing this, because I don't think he had any other source of income. I think that's what he's alluding to.
He is in Corinth. He is making tents. In Corinth, he is actually working for his living. But in other churches, he did receive financial and material help from the other churches as a preacher in those other churches, as a minister to those other churches. But it's very interesting that in Corinth, he is not getting any compensation from the Corinthians. He is earning his own keep. All right. Now, we're going to get back to this point in a second. We just had our parish assembly at St. Mary, where we talk about, the state of the church, how things are going. We decide on the compensation package for the priest. All right, among other things, but in particular because it's relevant to this chapter. So, what do you guys think about paying the preacher, about paying the priest? How should they be compensated? Should they be compensated? Is this a calling? Is it a ministry that really shouldn't be connected to money? Some people might think that.
There's a lot of different opinions on that, I think. There are some denominations where there is no paid preacher. Everybody is expected on one Sunday or the other to give a sermon and to lead worship.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Well, it's one way of doing things, but
Right.
Other people disagree, as you know. So are you talking about the Armenian church? Is that what you're saying?
No,
How
just
should
in
people get
general,
Armenian?
this concept of paying the priest. Go ahead.
I think it would be better if the priest had an independent job from church, because the danger of having the priest getting a salary from the church is that he loses his independence as a preacher, and he may not preach what needs to be preached for the fear of losing members, or for the fear of losing financial support. So I think it's best to have an independent source of income. And I was actually listening to a sermon by a Protestant preacher who was saying that I deliberately am not getting any offering from the church because I want to be independent, so that nobody can tell me that what to say, how to say it, and so that I'm not dependent on my congregation.
Yeah, very interesting. Nicolette, you raised your hand?
So I could be wrong, but I thought in Armenia, the priests don't get a salary. Like, do they just kind of? I was under the impression they live off of donations, like a donation box. So is that that would be a difference between like our church here and then in Armenia, correct?
That's right. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because in our diocese and in North America, and probably in most dioceses, the parish or the church or the diocese raises money for the priest's salary. In our diocese, it's the parish. We pay der Hofsep through our bazaars and through our fundraising, etc. And we also send money to the diocese from our budget to support their activities and their ministries. And that's different from what happens in Armenia. In Armenia, it depends who you are. In Armenia, here we go. So the parish priests, they get a very small allowance from the diocese, and it's like maybe $50 a month. It's not enough to live on. It's barely enough to like replenish church supplies or things like that. And the rest of their income comes from performing ceremonies like weddings and funerals and baptisms, etc., and of course other donations from their parish. And they're not even allowed to have a business outside of that to support themselves. There have been cases where parish priests in Armenia have been doing business on the side because it's very difficult to live on that kind of budget, and they've been either chastised or defrocked and they've been removed from the clergy for that activity, right? And for non-parish clergy, like the bishops and the harsrups and vartabeds and the veapartu, they get a salary from the diocese. They have much less of an economy to sustain because they're single people. Theoretically, the bishops and harsrups and vartabeds, they don't have a family, so they get a salary from the church to live on, and many of them also get a place to live in Echmiadzin or at a monastery. So their needs are very little, but they get a salary that's better, in fact, than what the priests get. So this is, like Gohar said, this is a difficult question because let's talk about a parish priest. That's our case. If the parish is supporting the priest, there could be some conflicts of interest there. Will the priest point out the problems that the parishioners have, their immoralities or sins, because that could risk alienating them. That could risk them giving to the parish. And if he has a family, that's an even more complicated question because he's not only putting his own well-being, but his family. So I think Gohar is right. There's a very difficult balance there for a parish priest who's earning his keep from his own parish.
Can I add something as well? Because I do disagree with Gohar on some level, because if we expect priests to marry and have families within the Armenian Church, we have to be able to provide for their families. And to, I think, say that they could have another source of income. Well, I work a Monday through Friday job, right? So I have an independent source of income. But if I was called to do a funeral on a Wednesday, I couldn't do it. If I was called to do to read last rites to the dying on a Tuesday, I couldn't do it. So we have to provide for the priest to be able to be available to us when we need him during those times. And so I think as in our religion, we do want our priests to get married and have children and set good examples. And I think if we don't provide for them to do that, I think we're going to run into a lot of problems.
That's the other side of the coin, right? On one side, the priest is in some ways beholden and maybe is not free to behave to address his parish in the way that he wants to for fear of alienating them. On the other side, the parish wants to be able to support the priest because they need a full-time shepherd for the flock. If the priest does have an outside job, he's going to be busy with that. He won't be able to devote his time to his flock. So there's definitely a tension there, and I don't know if there's a solution, but I wanted to bring it up because it's something that comes up every year during a parish assembly, and it's something that we should think about. John?
So, I used to go to church in Cupertino, California, which, as you might imagine, being in the Bay Area, is a rather expensive place to live. Even more expensive than DC.
Mm-hmm.
And so my opinion at the time during these parish assemblies was we should probably pay the priest the average salary of what the parishioners get. Because he's got to be able to live in the area to minister to the church. Right?
How did that work out?
Oh, I don't think he would listen to me. Not uncommon, by the way. But I felt, I mean, but I mean, I remember people were saying, you know, I said, look, this guy's an architect. Well, he's trained as an architect. And someone said, well, he's not working as an architect. And I thought, well, no, he's not. He gave that up so he could serve you, right? So
Yes.
it just seems to me that if people are going to give up their careers to serve the parishioners, then they shouldn't be the loser for that. So that's why I thought the average formula was, and you can make a more precise formula if you want, but the idea being, yeah, what the average parishioner earns, that's what he should probably earn.
As a matter of fact, our diocese has some minimum guidelines and also adjustments based on the city that the church is in for the salary. And then there's also a bonus if your membership is above a certain level, right? So I didn't bring this up so that we can solve it today, but I did want to bring it up because it's an issue that we deal with and we're facing, and it's actually a very old issue. I'm going to show you something from Ezekiel, which goes back many thousands of years, where Ezekiel is a prophet, and God sent Ezekiel to his people to say that, especially to the priests, that you guys are doing something wrong here. He says, woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? You eat the fat and clothe yourselves with wool. You slaughter the fat sheep without feeding the flock. Those who are sickly you have not strengthened. The diseased you have not healed. The broken you have not bound up. The scattered you have not brought back. Nor have you sought the lost. But with force and with severity you have dominated them. And this is another pitfall of the parish priests, to take advantage of the material things and not provide the spiritual, and not shepherd the flock in the right way. So, like I said, there's no solution I'm proposing here, but there are lots of things that we have to navigate as a church and understand as a church where things could go wrong and which ways maybe things can go right. Nicolette, you had raised your hand while I was reading. Oh, Lynette.
I'm sorry. Yeah, she just walked out of the room, but I think it comes back to just taking advantage of any position of leadership. When you have that kind of power, you can become very corrupt, right? We see this in our politics. We see this in our government, and a church is really no different. And so I think, yes, a priest should be paid for, because this is their career and they're tending to their flock. But I do think that certain measures need to be in place. And I actually like the idea of, I actually raised my hand because you talked about a bonus for the number of parishioners, because that's an incentive that drives a certain type of behavior, correct? So I really like that idea.
Yes, I agree with everything except with one caveat.
Mm-hmm.
The work of a priest includes a lot of material comfort and support, being by people's side, things that you can see and then you can touch and feel. But largely, it deals with how they work to increase people's faith and bring them closer to God. That's something that's hard to measure. The bonus is a membership related bonus, and that's not, membership does not mean that a high membership doesn't mean that the priest is doing his core is the priest is executing faithfully his mission from God, which is to bring people closer to Christ, right? It could mean that the priest is, I don't know, entertaining or a good guy.
Well, he's a good salesman, right?
or
He's
could be
an
a good
amazing
salesman.
salesperson.
Right.
But it could be a combination of membership and you throw in attendance in there too, right? It could be a two-tiered type of how much membership do you have? How many of those members are attending on a regular basis? And I mean, who keeps a track of that?
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, let's put this aside for now. I just wanted to bring it up because we just had our parish assembly and it was on my mind, and interesting thing to think about in this context. But let's get back to what Paul was saying, because Clara.
Yeah, I said let's go on.
Let's go on. Okay, very good. So we're going to go on. So what was the real purpose that Paul brought up this stuff about being paid for his work and an ox, not being muzzled when he's threshing, and earning some of the material benefits from performing this spiritual work? Let's continue and read this and see what really he's getting at. So who would like to read 12 through 18?
always. It's a small print, Zaven.
Oh, sorry. Well, I have a bigger screen.
I think I'm going to give away my age. Okay, hold on. Okay. Others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? Even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. But I have used none of these things, nor have I written these things, that it should be done so to me. For it would be better for me to die than that anyone should make my boasting void. If I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship, what is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel.
So, what's Paul's purpose for bringing up his role as a preacher and an apostle? Someone who he made a very strong case should get material rewards, should get compensation for his work by right. But here he's saying, I'm not going to take any of this. I'm not going to take anything from you. Because why? He even brings up the ministers of the holy things in the temple. They even get to eat of the sacrifice on the altar. But he's not going to do that.
Zaven, does it go back to what we just spoke about a priest's role is to bring you closer to your faith, and he doesn't feel like he's done that yet with the Corinthians, and until he's able to convince them to come closer to God and do right by God's word, that he's not going to take any kind of compensation.
Let me reflect that question. What do you guys think? What are some other thoughts?
We've not used this right.
Let me try, because the language is a little. Is he maybe saying that I'm not taking any of the donations because I don't want you to think that I am. No, wait.
Even so, the Lord has commanded us to preach.
So let's look over here. Let's look at this first part. What is this saying here? Let me erase that.
I don't understand the first sentence at all.
Okay. So he's referring backwards to other apostles, other people that he referenced before who have received material compensation for their preaching, who bring their wives along, who get to do this and that. They are the partakers of this right over the Corinthians, for example. All right? And if others have the right to receive that kind of compensation, don't we even more have a right to receive that? Because we're the ones who actually brought you the gospel. We're the ones who spent time with you. We're the ones who, for I don't know how long it was, the first time he was in Corinth, put the church together, who brought it up from nothing. And he says, don't I even have that kind of right among you to expect some sort of material compensation? And the answer, because it's a rhetorical question, is yes, he does. Nevertheless, he is not exercising that right. He has the supreme right to do that because he started that church, but he's not exercising that right because, for the sake of the gospel, he'll endure all things. He'll endure all things in order so that the gospel not be hindered. Okay, and he goes and gives a couple of more examples of people who have a right for that, but he is saying that, look, I'm completely in the right to ask you for material support, but I'm not going to do it because for me, preaching the gospel is my life. It's my duty. It's not even a job for me. It's my life. That's what I have to do. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel.
It's his reward.
Preaching the gospel is his reward. That's right. He doesn't need a material reward. Yeah. Preaching the gospel is his reward. And he wants to present the gospel without charge to the Corinthians so that he doesn't abuse his authority in the gospel. All right. Now, check this out. Do you follow me that he's making a case that he has every right, but he's putting that right aside?
Yes.
He has the freedom, he has the authority, he has an expectation to receive from the church that he started, and he's putting that aside. This is all in answer to the Corinthians who are saying, am I not free to eat food from idols, even though someone who is weaker, one of my weaker brothers, has a problem with it? That's his problem. I have the freedom. I've been given an understanding that there is only one God. There aren't other gods. There aren't idols. That this food is not being defiled by being sacrificed to these non-entities. But Paul is saying, look, I have even more authority than you. I have much more claim on all of you because of my apostleship, because I started this church. But I'm putting that aside. Why?
For a much nobler cause.
Mm-hmm.
Because
and not to hinder the gospel for anything.
Nothing can get in the way of the gospel. The freedom that God gifts us with, we should use wisely and with discipline, so that other people are not caused to stumble, so that nothing will get in the way of the gospel. Someone raised the hand. John Biberian.
Yeah, I don't think he wants some people to think he's in it for the money. He's in it just to little people.
What was that?
He doesn't want people to think he's preaching stuff so people will give him money. He's not in it for the money. Because this does occur these days, and it probably occurred back then, and people probably suspected that some people were saying things so they could collect money, and he's not going to do that.
He's not going to do that. And even though he does get money from other churches, later on in his letters to the Corinthians, he says he's robbed other churches for the sake of the Corinthians. But he's not going to take money from the Corinthians because he sees there is a sensitivity in the Corinthian parish, among the Corinthian church, on this topic of exercising your freedom to the detriment of other people. Let's go one step further here. All right, this is the last part of the chapter. Who would like to read that?
Zaven, I just want to say, I mean, it just shows you how sold out he is for the gospel and how passionate he is. Like, I would rather go hungry than I just want to preach the gospel. And rather than cause problems, I'm happy to go hungry, actually, because, there's another place that says, right, he's compelled to preach the gospel. Like, it just comes out of him.
And as a preacher, as an apostle, as a church founder, he is living his word. He is showing them how to live. He's showing his flock as a shepherd. He's showing them how to do it.
Yeah.
So let's finish this off. 19 through 27. We're almost done with the race.
Should I read?
Yes.
Or
Girard,
okay,
go ahead.
who? Yeah. Girard,
Unless you want to read.
No, please, Girard, go ahead. Daddy wants to
No,
hear your
very
voice.
good, Gerard. Go ahead.
For though I am free of all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified.
Okay. So, yes. Someone's going to say something? This is the key. Oh, it's myself I'm hearing, actually. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. This is the compassion. This is the ministry, right? This is the witness. I'm sorry, I'm trying to tie it into 90s talk from yesterday. This is the type of witness that Paul is asking us to be. Type of witness to the gospel that Paul is asking us to be. To become all things to all people, so that some might be saved, so that the gospel would go forward. Nicolette.
Sorry, it's me.
Lynette, sorry.
I actually love this one, this reading. I think it shows so much humility. He basically says, I've become one with many different people so that I can bring them to the faith. I also really love the part where he talks about the perishable crown versus the imperishable crown. The kingdom of God as opposed to the material world. I really like this one. This one's spoken the most to me tonight.
So he brings in some I don't know, some analogies here about running a race and competing for a prize. Where is all this driving towards? This is what he wants of the Corinthians. What does he want from the Corinthians? What is he saying he wants from the Corinthians through this?
I think it goes back again to humility, to grace, where he says, those who run in a race all run, but who receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. I think it's to walk through life in a graceful manner. We're all going to live. We're all part of this world. We've all been given this one life to live. How do we choose to live this one life?
Yeah, I agree. And there's another word that I would put in this. Humility is something that is all over this section here. That he's made himself like his fellow man. That he approaches them where they are. That he understands who they are and how to speak with them. All right, that's humility. But there's something else on this side that he's asking particularly of the Corinthians. Humility is something they definitely need, but they need one other thing, I think.
He's basically saying, take an example let me take an example of my devotion, my selflessness, my subjection of my body to what? Yeah. So basically saying, this is how you should live. Look how I have, look at me, what I have been doing for the gospel, and let it be an example for your lives.
All right. When you think of running for a race, when you think of competing for a prize, when you think of, not beating the air, right, and not doing something with uncertainty, what comes to mind? He wants discipline. He wants, like an athlete, he wants those guys to be strong, to be disciplined, to be temperate, in control of themselves. And this is kind of where the Corinthians were getting off track. They were kind of drunk with their knowledge, and knowledge without wisdom, and freedom without humility. They were kind of too much in themselves, and not enough about the rest of their church. And he's trying to rein them back in by encouraging them, like an athlete, to be disciplined in their faith.
And I would add steadfast. And Zaven, correct me if I'm wrong. I also feel when he's talking about running in a race, competing, I think he's also acknowledging that he is finite, and someone else needs to carry the torch after him. I think he's looking for, for this faith to go on when he's gone.
So it's a relay race. I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah, that's a very good
I really think he's not only, and I agree with Gohart and what you said. It's about the discipline. But I also think he's trying to make sure this lives beyond him, because I think he again showing humility that he's not going to be there forever.
He won't be there forever, but his prize, his goal is forever. Is something forever. Right. So Paul is trying to emphasize to the Corinthians. I'm going to quote from another part of the letter that we'll see later. He says of himself, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. And this is what his message is to the Corinthians who are struggling with this, and maybe in our church we might see the same thing occasionally too. Anyway, let's end with the Psalms because it's kind of late. And if there are other things we could talk about, we can talk afterwards or save it for another time. So, who would like to read Psalm 38 as our final prayer?
Let Jirai read it again.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jirai.
Lord, let me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. Behold, thou hast made my days a few hand breadths, and my lifetime is as nothing in thy sight. Surely every man stands as a mere breath. Surely man goes about as a shadow. Surely for naught are they in turmoil. Man heaps up and knows not what will gather. And now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in thee.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next time.
God bless you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks, Zaven. That was really
Thanks.
great. Thanks for
Thanks, Zaven.
explaining the canon. I'd never had that explained. I've seen that a lot in the manuscripts
Yeah.
and didn't understand
Yep.
how to think about that.
I just figured it out today myself.
Okay. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, knowledge without wisdom and freedom without discipline. I mean, that's huge. Freedom without discipline. I mean, both of those are disastrous. If we
Right. Well,
All right.
thank you so much, Zakis.
Yeah.
God bless you.
really helpful.
Thanks,
God bless
everyone,
every one of you. Every
Thanks,
one of
Zaven.
us.
Thanks, Zaven.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. Thanks.
Bye,
Thanks for
teacher.
having me.
All right. Don't forget
Thank
it's
you.
Lent. Keep fasting. Keep disciplined.
Yeah.
No,
All right.
it's
Bye-bye.
not for everyone.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Share
Sis.
body.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Share.